At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode until the question and answer session of today's conference. At that time, you may press star one on your phone to ask a question. I would like to inform all parties that today's conference is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. I would now like to turn the conference over to Ms. Irene Ihir. Thank you. You may begin.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Irene Ihir of CDRH's Office of Communication and Education. Welcome to the FDA's 59th in a series of virtual town hall meetings to help answer technical questions about the development and validation of tests for SARS-CoV-2 during the public health emergency. Today, Toby Lowe, Associate Director of the Office of In Vitro Diagnostics and Radiological Health in the Office of Product Evaluation and Quality, and Dr. Christian Roth, both from CDRH, will provide a brief update. Following opening remarks, we will open the line for your questions related to the development and validation of tests for SARS-CoV-2. Please remember that during this town hall, we are not able to respond to questions about specific submissions that might be under review. Now, I give you Toby.
Thanks, Irene. Thanks, everyone, for joining us again this week. One update that I have before we get into the Q&As is that late last week, we updated the webpage on SARS-CoV-2 viral mutations and the impact on COVID-19 tests. We added new information about a potential impact on the performance of the Mesa Biotech Acula SARS-CoV-2 test due to a genetic mutation at specific positions in patient samples. That test was already listed on that website, so it's not a new test that we've identified an impact from viral mutations. It's just an additional mutation that we've identified that impacts that test. Same as in the previous communications about the impact on COVID-19 tests, we do not think that this impact is significant, but we are providing this information out of an abundance of caution, and we will continue to do so, updating this webpage and sending out information about impact of viral mutations as additional information comes about. And with that, I will move on to the prepared Q&As that we have. So the first one is about antigen tests regarding using fresh samples, and that FDA has generally indicated a preference for fresh samples for supporting antigen tests. However, this inquiry notes that there's a growing complexity of obtaining fresh positive samples, and that the sponsor would like to freeze samples collected during a post-EUA study and then use frozen samples to support development of another assay for an EUA submission. And they're seeking FDA feedback on that. And then along with that, they're also asking about achieving the sample sizes currently discussed for post-authorization studies and the difficulty in achieving those sample sizes due to dropping positivity rates and rising vaccination rates in the U.S. So they're asking what other options are available to reach those post-EUA study numbers. Excuse me. So for the first question about banked or frozen samples, we do generally consider those to be acceptable specimens for clinical validations, but we do not recommend banked samples to support at-home testing, either for prescription or over-the-counter, since we do need to evaluate not only how the users perform the test, but the performance impact of specimen collection when self-collected or when lay users are collecting specimens from other individuals. We would also generally want to see an evaluation of the impact of the freeze-thaw cycles, I believe, on those specimens as part of your evaluation. And then for the post-authorization studies, those are typically prospective studies, and we do expect sponsors to attempt to fulfill the conditions of authorization If the sponsor is having difficulty obtaining additional prospective positives, then we would ask that they email their review team, describe the situation, and request an extension, or propose other options for discussion. And then this question did also ask about data collected outside of the U.S. And so we do think that that may be feasible, but we would want to look at the specific details of the sponsor's proposal. So we would ask that you reach out to the review team to discuss that specifically. The next question we have is regarding any guidelines that the FDA might have for an NGS test for long COVID. And so generally the tests that we have authorized so far are intended for use in the detection of SARS-CoV-2 virus as an aid in the diagnosis of infection with the virus. If you're developing an NGS test for that type of indication, we would want to engage with you through a pre-EUA, since the NGS validation is a little more nuanced than some of the other test types. And we would prefer to discuss with you about your specific test and the claims and technology, so we can work with you on a validation approach that's most appropriate. And in terms of, a test specifically for long COVID, we are interested in learning more about the etiology and the reports of individuals who have been sickened with COVID-19 but don't recover fully over a period of weeks. And if you're developing a test to diagnose or monitor long COVID, we would also be interested in discussing that through a pre-EUA. Chris, do you have anything you want to add on that one?
No, I think as Toby mentioned, the data and studies are still kind of in progress, and data is being generated for these type of individuals. And if there are approaches that folks have for kind of predicting this or helping in this kind of area, then I think we're definitely interested in speaking with you in the pre-EUA.
Great, thanks, Chris. The next question that we have is along the lines of questions that we've had on previous town halls. This is about FDA's policy on SARS-CoV-2 EUA submissions and sort of the timeline for the public health emergency. So they're asking when FDA will stop accepting new EUA applications, when FDA will stop accepting amendments to existing EUA products, when the current EUAs will expire, how long EUA products can be distributed after the EUA expires, and will there be a grace period for EUAs transitioning to 510Ks. So, we have talked about this a bit before. We are still accepting EUA requests, both for original EUAs and supplemental EUA requests for amendments to previously authorized tests. We don't have a timeline that we can comment on for a transition plan, but we have previously announced that the center is working on a transition plan for devices offered under EUA. And that's a guidance document that's included on the center's guidance priority list for FY21. That's the title on that priority list is the transition plan for medical devices distributed under enforcement policies or emergency use authorization during the COVID-19 public health emergency. And generally, unless it's revoked, an EUA is in effect until the public health emergency is terminated. And that is a specific termination by the Secretary of HHS that goes along, sort of the end of the declaration that the Secretary makes at the beginning of the public health emergency to allow FDA to start using the EUA authority. And so, at some point in the future, the Secretary then terminates that emergency, but that is not something that we would expect to happen for quite a while. You can see that there are previous public health emergencies that still have not been terminated, looking at Zika and Ebola as examples there. So, while we can't anticipate when the public health emergency will end, we can make clear that we're committed to helping to ensure that the public has access to a wide variety of test options for COVID-19. And we do continue to review EUAs, and we plan to continue to do so as long as there is a public health need for that to be done. Regarding conversion to 510Ks, we have mentioned last week on the town hall, as well as in previous town halls, that anyone looking to submit a 510K, submit a pre-submission for so that we can discuss your proposed validation approach to help make that process go as smoothly as possible. The next question we have is, let's see, about a molecular point of care COVID device for an EUA. This company intends to submit an EUA request and is asking about a notification letter for the manufacturer to commercialize the device while the EUA is under review. So just to clarify, there are, this question appears to be referring to the notification policies that are included in the guidance document, the policy for coronavirus disease 2019 tests during the public health emergency. And that policy guidance document does include the notification policies that puts together a process for a manufacturer following completion of their assay validation to notify FDA that their assay has been validated and that they intend to begin distribution or use of the test. Generally, FDA would acknowledge receipt of the notification and add the name of the test developer and the test to our website listing. We do have a list of all notified tests, excuse me, on the FAQ pages. And, in the guidance document, it outlines a process for the test developer to submit a completed EUA request within 15 business days of the notification to FDA that the assay has been successfully validated. And if that's not done, we would generally remove the test from the website and may take additional actions as appropriate. There are a couple of important things to note here. One is that submission of an EUA request is not the same as notifying under the policies and the guidance. A test developer that intends to use the notification policy must specifically notify per the process outlined in the guidance and should not assume that, that they're considered to be notified simply because they submitted an EUA request. And then another thing that I want to note is that this question specifically mentions a point of care device. And the notification policy is specific to tests being used in high complexity CLIA certified laboratories. Tests that are not yet authorized are under CLIA are limited to use in high complexity CLIA certified laboratories. So that would generally not apply to point of care devices unless that point of care setting is falls under a CLIA certified laboratories, a high complexity CLIA certified laboratories certificate. All right, the next question we have is about quantitative viral load molecular tests for COVID-19. And this would be a test that would measure viral count per milliliter, not a test that would just report the CT count. The question is asking for FDA's viewpoint on the medical importance or usefulness of such a test, whether we would support or encourage the development of such a test, whether it be used for screening similar to other tests, or other populations, patient populations that we would recommend it be used for, as well as the review priority that that this would fall under. Generally, now that an international standard is available, it is possible for a meaningful quantitative test to be developed, and we are glad to engage in discussions about validation of such a test. There are limited guidelines for use of this type of information, so we would want to engage in a discussion of the appropriate intended use, and we would, that discussion would need to be in the context of the specific test setting and technology being proposed. So we would encourage you to submit a pre-EUA so that we can discuss those options with you. And Chris, do you want to add anything on that one?
Yeah, thanks. I think there's just a lot of different options in this for this type of intended use. And so unfortunately, I don't think we can really provide some specific answers to these questions. There's just too many different ways to go. But certainly having the international standard will help tremendously. And I think we're ready to engage. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Chris. And that is all the prepared Q&As that we have, so we can open up the line for live questions.
Thank you. If you would like to ask a question by phone, please press star 1, unmute your phone, and record your name clearly. Your name is required to introduce your question. If you need to withdraw your question, press star 2. Again, to ask a question by phone, please press star 1. Our first question comes from Shannon Clark. Your line is open.
Good morning. This is Shannon Clark with UserWise Consulting. We specialize in human factors testing, so I'm a little unclear on some of the requirements surrounding clinical evaluation testing for over-the-counter use. In human factors testing, we would never train participants for OTC use. We'd never ask them to please follow the instructions for OTC use, and we also wouldn't make them aware that they can follow each step of the app during OTC use, just to simulate a realistic use case. But in recent responses from the FDA, it seems like what we can do in the clinical evaluation for OTC is to ask them to please read the instructions prior to proceeding into their session. And so this is a layperson in the clinical evaluation with self-testing. Would it be appropriate to ask the participants to please read the instructions and follow each step of the instructions throughout that clinical evaluation, such that the scope is whether the instructions are understandable by intended users?
Thanks for that question. I know that there are, there is some information in the EUA templates about the study design, and I know that we've also had some, specific discussions with sponsors about particular study design questions. I believe that we would want the study design to be as close to a true use case as possible. Generally that would not include, verbally telling an individual to specifically read the instructions and follow each step. But I will ask Chris to weigh in on that, as he's probably been in more of those study design conversations.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. The key take-home message that Toby is trying to get across here is that it needs to simulate a home use environment as much as possible, and clearly any direction that user is going to get to look at something, follow something, do this, don't do that. I mean, that's something that's not going to be available to that person, when they buy it off the shelf and take it home. So again, this is kind of depends on the details of what the study is. Is it a simulated home use environment? Is it actually in home use? So I think we could have those discussions in the context of an actual detailed clinical study plan as well.
So it seems like the only difference between human factors testing and clinical evaluation testing is that in clinical evaluation testing, you may or may not be required to observe users. That seems like maybe that's optional, and you would collect actual specimens and provide an actual result. whereas in human factors testing, you definitely observe, but you may not give the participants an actual result, maybe a mock result. Is that true? That is potentially the differences between these two types of tests is quite limited?
On its face, yes, I would agree with that. But again, of course, there's always details. The usability study or human factor study really has you've got different goals there, right? So you're going to evaluate that study differently. You're going to generate different type of data. So I think we understand that, and you don't maybe necessarily need to have a live result in that type of setting.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I think there's also, especially for EUA studies, we've tried to work with sponsors as much as possible to simplify everything. And so, if there are ways so that the, clinical study and the usability can be combined into a single study, that's something that we, would be happy to help talk through. And so I think that may be where some of the confusion is coming in as well, because that's something we've been trying to encourage to streamline everything.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Alex. Your line is open.
Hi, this is Alex Weinberg with UserWise Consulting. During over-the-counter human factors testing for an antigen test kit with mid-turbinate swabs, we've concluded that participants or users may over-insert or under-insert the swab. Does FDA have any published research that they can share or guidance to share as how precisely to define insertion that's too deep or too shallow?
I'm not sure if we would have any published research about that. I believe that there are some CDC recommendations regarding specimen collection for different specimen types. So I would suggest that you start there. If you are having trouble finding what you're looking for and have specific questions, you can send those in, and we can try and help with that as well.
Okay, I'll use that as a starting point. Thank you.
Our next question comes from Annie Wright. Your line is open.
Hello, my name is Annie Wright, and I'm from Montville, USA. A few weeks back, someone had asked a question about conducting a submission for a combo device. So it would be flu A/B and then COVID-19 antigen test. And at the time, Tim had indicated that the flu A/B can be submitted without 510K clearance. And I was wondering if this could also apply. I just wanted to confirm if it could also be applied for OTC products.
So there's a couple of things there. Just to clarify, I believe that the statement from Tim that you're referring to was about an EUA submission and whether an EUA submission could include flu A/B, where that flu A/B portion of the multianalyte test had not previously been reviewed by FDA. And that is correct that you can do that.
Correct.
You can submit an EUA request for a multianalyte test that where the flu A/B portion has not previously been reviewed. In terms of over-the-counter, we have not to date authorized multianalyte tests for over-the-counter. We have not, in fact, within or outside of the emergency, authorized flu tests for over-the-counter. There's not really an indication for testing asymptomatic individuals for flu. That's not an indication that we have authorized or encouraged at this point. So, Chris, I don't know if you want to add anything there on that discussion.
No, I think you covered it perfectly. Thanks.
So basically, it would not probably be accepted by the FDA or reviewed by the FDA if we did submit something like that?
If over-the-counter flu is something that you're really interested in pursuing, we would encourage you to submit a pre-EUA if it's a combo with COVID, or a pre-submission if it was a non-COVID or non-EUA test. And that's something that we could discuss with you. But as at this point, we do not have any indication that there's a reason to test asymptomatic individuals for flu.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Our next question comes from Kodumudi Venkat. Your line is open.
Hello, good afternoon. Thanks for taking my call. I am Kodumudi Venkateswaran from Tetracore. I heard the last week when Dr. Timothy Stenzel, when he was answering a question, how long it takes to get a response on the EUA applications for different applicants. He mentioned that around 5,500 applications are received in a year, including COVID and non-COVID applications, with around 300 staff members at your center, and he mentioned that it is a large volume. So we appreciate your center is working hard to really support the large volume of applications and the industry. I think you are overstretched and overwhelmed with the applications, and we as industries, especially the small businesses, we are really hurt because of still not getting enough response from your center. Do you think it will help as many small industries, small businesses meeting together and then seeking help from FDA Commissioner's Office to give your center more resources to cater, or even taking this to the Small Business Administration or even DHHS, or through our congressional representatives to the President Biden's administration, so that you can get more resources to support us?
Thanks for your support. We are definitely working hard to support the large volume of submissions. We do understand the frustration from the industry side of things, and the impact that this can have. Resources is an area that we are always looking at in terms of what we can do, and probably the best approach I would think from for businesses would be to go discuss with your if there's a association that you affiliate with. They're usually good groups to have some of those discussions with, and see if there might be discussions that are relevant to what you're looking to do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question will come from Laura D'Angelo. Your line is open.
Hi, thanks for taking my call and for holding these calls for 59 weeks. I have a kind of question that I understand it might just refer me back to the yet to be published guidance, but do you have any preview on the process for CLIA waivers post or during the transition? So given that, point of care tests are deemed CLIA waived at this time, is it going to be, if you have any insight, dual submission pathway, or is it going to be, CLIA waiver by application submitted separately, or, broken into point of care not waived and point of care waived, or if everything's going to end up point of care waived? Is there just any insight that you can spotlight there?
That's a really good question. I can't unfortunately talk about what may or may not be in the guidance document, since that's still in the works. I can tell you that we do plan to issue that transition guidance as draft with a comment period. to allow for stakeholder input prior to finalization. So we don't at this point intend for it to be an immediately in effect guidance the way that we've done for several guidances during the public health emergency. So I think that can give you a little bit, since I'm sure you're familiar with FDA guidance process, I think that will give you a little hint into timeline there for when that transition process would be taking place. But with that said, you're correct that tests are deemed to be CLIA waived when they're authorized for use at the point of care during the emergency. That is not a CLIA categorization. It will not, be in place after the EUA is terminated. So, I would suspect that it will be, somewhat of a normal process, depending on whatever the transition plan is that's put into place, to get that sort of permanent categorization. We would go through, a similar process to what we normally go through for submissions, and whether that's a dual or CLIA waiver by application will probably depend on your particular circumstances.
Okay, thank you, and thanks for also the general work in kind of easing the CLIA waiver process.
Thank you.
Once again, if you would like to ask a question at this time, you can press *1 on your phone and record your name when prompted. Our next question comes from Ashwood Damon. Your line is open.
Hello, thank you very much for taking my question. I have a general question about product tweaks or updates while it's awaiting an EUA. So if a manufacturer decides to submit a slightly improved version of a product that's currently awaiting EUA, do they maintain their queue in the applications line, or is it sent back at the beginning of the queue again? Thank you.
So, the tests that are awaiting review are, not necessarily in a sort of first in, first out type of queue. So it's not necessarily that, it's not like we're going to send you to the back of the line if you submit something to add to your submission. The adding something to your submission would not, like I said, it's not going to put you to the back of the line. If anything, if it's, if there's something about what you add to your submission that, like you said, improves your test, or, adds something that is considered to be a priority for FDA review, then it would potentially bump your submission higher up on the queue. But generally there are a variety of factors that impact the where a test is in terms of priority for review, and so the details of each submission would be considered as we determine what is sort of next up for review as reviewers become available.
Okay, thank you. For some manufacturers, it's been the case where the FDA has told them to withdraw their current application and resubmit the new one. Does that apply to that case as well?
So there are definitely situations where we might tell a sponsor that, as submitted, we don't necessarily think that their submission is likely to be successful, or that we think there's, a sort of significant amount of additional validation that we would want to see, or other things like that that might take some time to do. And in those cases, we may, discuss with the developer options that might include withdrawing and resubmitting once they have more of a complete package. Again, since it's not a sort of first in, first reviewed type of queue, it is based on various priorities and details about each submission. We would then evaluate the new submission when it came in to determine whether it is a priority for review at that time.
Okay, thanks.
Chris, do you want to add anything to that about, the review queues or anything?
No, I think you covered it, and I think it's, it depends on what the test is, and if there's a significant improvement. For instance, if there's an improvement in throughput, right? If you're going from 1,000 to 10,000 per day or something like that, that may even increase the priority of that test. So I think really is a case by case basis, and it depends on what changes you're implementing.
Great, thanks, Chris.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Richard Montagna. Your line is open.
Yes, this is Richard Montagna from Marionics. Toby, we sent a question in last week that you did respond to that had to deal with pooling of saliva. And you had suggested last week that we take a look at the Quadrant Biosciences EUA, which we have done. And that raised another question that we actually sent in yesterday by email, but I think we might have missed the deadline. And the question is, since Quadrant uses a defined saliva collection kit, and we will be using archived specimens, would FDA find it acceptable if we took the archived specimen, took an aliquot of it, ran it in our test, and took another aliquot of the same specimen, put it into the Quadrant collection device, which begins their process for real-time PCR, so we can get the CT values and show that at least 25% of the samples in the pool are in fact low titers. So we're just asking if that would be acceptable.
So, I think some of that, I don't think you mentioned what type of collection device you plan to use and whether you intend to evaluate your test. You said archive specimens with.
I should have made it clear. We already have authorization for saliva using our own collection device.
Okay.
So we'd be looking at two different collection devices, our own for our test, and then the Quadrant one for the real-time PCR component of it.
Got it. Okay. Chris, do you want to weigh in on that study design question?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's likely going to be acceptable. We're going to want to see some sort of bridging study, if appropriate, just to establish that the buffer is kind of behaving in a predictable manner. But I suspect that we would want to kind of see this written out a little bit more detailed, because obviously the devil is always in the details. And but I think on its face, again, it seems acceptable.
Okay, thank you very much. So when his question does make its way to your desk, he can obviously ignore it since you've answered it. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question will come from Franco Calderon. Your line is open.
Thank you for taking my call. So I have two quick questions. So one is about the remaining market opportunity for at-home antigen tests. So we have been working on ours for about 10 months now, and we're still sort of battling the Part J of the template regarding the analytical and the clinical. The clinical really has shown to be pretty consistent, concordant with PCR tests. So the question there is, from a market opportunity standpoint, it looks like we may be a little late to the game. So is it wise to continue on this road, or does it make sense to move on to something else? And that something else is neutralizing antibodies. So the question there is, would FDA be amenable to a purely qualitative LFT test where the test shows, well, actually it might be semi-quant in a sense, where the test will show over time, let's say, if you were to test a few times in, let's say, 6 months after the first test, 2 lines, control line, test line, that it shows that over time, the test line wanes out. Would that be amenable to FDA, or do we need to be a lot more quantitative in that regard?
Thanks for that question. So for the first part of your question about antigen, home antigen test, I'm not sure that we would we're able to weigh in on the market opportunity. I think that's, a business decision that you would have to make as to whether or not to continue pursuing that. And then for the second part of your test, you're asking about whether we would consider a purely quantitative lateral flow neutralizing antibody test. Is that
correct?
Did I get that right?
Correct. But the way we are designing the test is that it would require, let's say, maybe 3 tests over a 6-month period, which would show, that there is decreasing presence of antibodies related to your immunity from the vaccine or from natural infection, but not in any quantitative way, which is really not that different than a test that I just took. I'm not going to mention the name. It's a well-known lab. It's a semi-quant neutralizing antibody test. Basically, what they told me was, okay, any result greater than 1 is positive, and my result was 20. So does that make sense?
Yeah, so we do have the neutralizing antibody template posted to our website, and there are recommendations for validation of semi-quantitative tests in that template. So I think that would be, where I would suggest you look for the recommendations there. But we do have those out there. So we are the validation recommendations in the template, and we are considering those. I don't know that we've had. I'm not sure if we've had much in terms of lateral flows that have been successful with that semi-quantitative neutralizing antibody approach there.
Right. Oh, okay. I will look at that template. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you. And as we continue, we do ask that you please limit yourself to 1 question. Once again, please limit yourself to 1 question as we continue. Our next question will come from Iromi Gardina. Your line is open.
Hello, this is Siromi Gardina. So this is a follow-up on a question that Dr. Stenzel answered last week regarding the validation of rapid self-testing antigen tests, and maybe there's also going to be antibody tests that will be available, and the mobile apps that are being used to capture and transfer this data to the HHS Waters database. And FDA saw this coming and, as you know, had the Designathon, and we are one of the winners of that contest. And my question is, what we do is it's test agnostic, and we have a mobile app that can capture the data on individuals and in groups, and then transfer it directly to the HHS database. So the test developer doesn't have to do that part. And do we have to submit a 510K for the software for this product? Because we were not told that this is necessary, because it's just capturing the positive, negative, the positivity or negativity of a test and then transferring it. And so I didn't know whether we have to do a software validation for this. It's test agnostic.
Sure. So unfortunately, I was not particularly involved in the Designathon, so I may not be able to answer all of your questions. We do have some experts on our team who would be able to, if you want to send in your question with some more specifics of what your app does and what you're looking to do.
Okay.
I think that some of the answers will be dependent on specifically on how your how your app interfaces with the tests that it would be used with.
Okay.
In terms of, whether it would have any impact on the performance of the test itself. And so we would want you to to be sure to have some information about that when you send in your question, and then we can get that over to the right folks here. So if you send that to CDRH-EUA-templates at fda.hhs.gov.
Just a minute. Where do I get that information from? CDRH. Is there some website that I can look at and get the information? I don't want to take too much time. So
yeah, it should be on the slides that are being shown on the screen right now.
Oh, okay.
It'll also be in the transcript and on the webpage, I'm sure.
Okay.
But if you send that in, it's CDRH-EUA-templates at fda.hhs.gov, and you can note that you asked the question on the town hall and that I suggested that you send it in. We can make sure it gets to the right person.
All right. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Our next question will come from David Raviger. Your line is open.
Hi, I had a question about EUA supplements to add additional claims to an existing EUA and how that affects existing product in the field. So upon authorization of an EUA supplement, is all existing product under the original authorization no longer authorized? Yeah, because that would obviously bring up issues of field actions and recalls, et cetera.
That's something that we can work with you on during the review of the amendment. We would want to understand, how much product is on the market with the previously authorized labeling, and what your plans are. If you have plans to to sort of do an in-field update, those are details that we can work through with you during the review of that supplemental EUA request.
I see.
And Chris, do you want to add anything on that?
No, I think that's exactly right. We would want to kind of get some predictability as far as what the change will entail and how you're going to implement the change. And I think we've done that quite a few times with other folks.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And once again, if you would like to ask a question at this time, you can press *1 on your phone and record your name when prompted. Our next question comes from someone whose name was not recorded, but if you pressed *1, your line is now open and you may ask your question. And caller, we're not able to hear you in conference. Please check the mute feature on your phone.
Hi, this is Rainer Zeman. I'm not sure whether you're referring to me, but I appreciate for having the opportunity to ask a question. I have a follow-up question to the written question that was submitted by one of my colleagues regarding the pathway of marketing a product while the product is undergoing EUA review. So did I understand correctly that if we are talking about a molecular point of care product, this notification pathway may not be applicable? In other words, is there any way, if you want to get authorization of a point of care product, to market it while the product is under review, or is it not a possible pathway? Thank you.
You are correct that there is when I answered that question earlier, I did say that the notification pathway is generally not applicable. The notification pathway is for tests to be offered prior to receiving an EUA, and under CLIA, which is overseen by CMS, the CLIA regulations stipulate that any test that is not FDA authorized is limited to use at CLIA certified laboratories that meet the requirement for testing high complexity tests. So generally, point of care tests are used in settings that operate under a CLIA certificate of waiver, and so that would not be something that can be done with the notification pathway.
Thank you. But just to clarify, what about is it an option for us if we wanted to sell only to high complexity CLIA laboratories, even though we strive for a point of care designation? could we, while the product is under review, sell to high complexity CLIA laboratories?
That is potentially an option, depending on the use and the use of your test and whether it would fit the other aspects of the notification policy. So that's something that it may be worth sending in some additional details about the test so that we can take a look at that.
Okay, great. Yeah.
I would suggest when you send that in, take a look at the guidance document first and look through, and so that you can explain in your email how your test fits into the description of the policy and the guidance.
Great. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.